On the eve of the biggest sporting event in human history, the most powerful man in football looked into the cameras and made a promise. He said demand for World Cup tickets had exceeded every expectation by a factor of 10 or more. He said it with confidence. He said it like a man who had nothing to hide. He said it like a man who knew the cameras would back him up. He was wrong. And he was wrong in the most public way imaginable. Less than 24 hours later, those same cameras turned toward a stadium in Mexico, and they showed the world something else entirely. Something Gianni Infantino did not want you to see. Something that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. Rows of seats, empty, not a handful. Not a scattered few here and there that could be explained away as bathroom breaks or fans. Grabbing food, entire sections. Bands of red stretching across the stands, untouched while the match played on below. One man's words. One camera's footage, and the entire footballing world watching both at the same time within a single day, forced to decide which one to believe. The confident promise made in a press conference, or the unedited picture broadcast live into living rooms across the planet. Stay with us, because this story is only just beginning, and it goes much deeper than a few empty chairs. Let's set the scene, because the scale of this tournament is part of what makes the contradiction so striking. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is the largest tournament of its kind ever staged. 48 teams, up from 32 in every previous edition. 3 host nations, the United States, Mexico, and Canada, sharing hosting duties for the first time in World Cup history. 16 host cities, spread across an entire continent. Over 100 matches played across more than a month of football. This isn't just bigger than past World Cups. It's bigger by a significant margin. More games, more venues, more logistics, more opportunities for things to either go spectacularly right or spectacularly wrong in full view of a global audience. And according to FIFA itself, the appetite for this tournament has been staggering. More than 6 million tickets sold. Applications for those tickets reportedly numbering in the hundreds of millions, submitted from fans in every single one of FIFA's 211 member nations and territories. By any measure, on paper, this is a tournament drowning in demand, a tournament so popular that, in Infantino's own words, the ticket request received in a single fortnight could have filled 300 years' worth of previous World Cups combined. Absolutely crazy, he called it, his words, not ours. He stood in front of a room of journalists and dignitaries and used the word crazy to describe how successful this tournament already was, weeks before a single ball had even been kicked. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why those words have come back to haunt him, and why what happened in one Mexican stadium on the second day of the tournament may be the single most damaging image FIFA has produced in years, not because of what it showed on its own, but because of everything it confirmed, all at once, for anyone who had been paying attention to the months of warnings leading up to this moment. But first, if you want to see exactly how this story unfolds, layer by layer, with every contradiction laid out side by side, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. Because what's coming next is the kind of contradiction that doesn't just embarrass an organization. It can unravel one, piece by piece, match by match, until the gap between message and reality becomes impossible to manage. Here is the central tension of this entire story. On one side, you have Gianni Infantino's words. Unprecedented demand, record-breaking numbers, a global celebration unlike anything football has ever seen. 500 million ticket requests, 6 million tickets sold, a tournament so popular it could fill 3 centuries of past World Cups. On the other side, you have a television camera, pointed at a stadium, on day 2 of the tournament, showing row after row after row of empty red seats in a city that should never have struggled to fill them. 2 realities, broadcast within 24 hours of each other, to the same global audience. Only one of them can be true, and the cameras don't lie. Let's go to Guadalajara. The match was South Korea against the Czech Republic, played at the Estadio Akron, a stadium holding just over 46,000 people, in a city famous for its football culture. Guadalajara isn't some afterthought venue, tucked away as a token host city to satisfy a regional quota. This is a city that lives and breathes the game, a city where football is woven into daily life, where stadiums have a history of roaring at full volume for matches involving teams that have nothing to do with Mexico at all, simply because the football itself is the draw. If there was ever a place where a World Cup match should sell out without effort, where you would expect to see a sea of fans regardless of which 2 nations were playing, it was here. And yet, when the cameras panned across the stands during the match, the picture told a different story. Thousands of empty seats. Entire sections sitting untouched. Sweeping bands of red, vacant, visible to every single person watching at home. Not in the cheap seats up in the rafters, where empty patches are sometimes expected and easily overlooked. In the middle tiers, in sections that, under normal circumstances, would be among the first to fill. FIFA reported an official attendance of just under 45,000, a number that, on its own, sounds close to capacity for a 46,000-seat stadium. But attendance figures and what your eyes can see are 2 very different things. And in this case, the eyes won. Clips of the empty stands spread across social media within hours, shared and reshared, paused and zoomed in on by viewers determined to understand what they were looking at. Fans who had been warning about this for months suddenly had the receipts, screenshots, timestamps, wide-angle shots that left no room for ambiguity. And just like that, a single broadcast camera did something that months of press releases and ticket statistics could not. It punctured the narrative. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't some minor group stage match buried deep in the schedule, played at an odd hour with minimal broadcast coverage. This was day 2 of the tournament. The eyes of the entire footballing world were still locked on, still riding the high of the opening ceremony, still tuned in to see how this unprecedented, history-making World Cup would unfold. And what they saw didn't match what they'd been told. Not even close. So what happened? Why were the seats empty? To understand that, we have to go back. Months before the tournament even began, FIFA made a decision that would define this entire controversy. The decision to use dynamic ticket pricing. If you're not familiar with the concept, think of it like airline pricing or surge pricing for a rideshare on a Friday night. The more demand there appears to be for a ticket, the higher the price climbs, sometimes by the hour, sometimes overnight. In theory, it's a system designed to maximize revenue by letting the market decide what a ticket is worth. A model borrowed directly from industries where seats and tickets are treated purely as financial products, optimized for profit down to the last percentage point. In practice, for a World Cup, an event that is supposed to belong to the fans, to ordinary people, to communities that have followed these national teams for generations. Sometimes through decades of heartbreak just to see this moment. It meant something else entirely. It meant that as interest in a match grew, the price of attending that match could spiral upward, sometimes dramatically, often without warning, leaving fans who hesitated for even a day watching prices climb out of reach in real time. Imagine saving for months, finally logging on to buy a ticket for your country's match, and watching the price jump again while you're still deciding. That's not a hypothetical. That's the system FIFA built. Fan organizations saw this coming from miles away. Football Supporters Europe, a group representing supporters across the continent with a long history of advocating for the people who fill the stands, formally raised the alarm months in advance. They didn't just complain on social media. They filed a formal complaint with the European Commission, accusing FIFA of pricing ordinary fans out of their own World Cup. According to that organization, ticket prices for this tournament were nearly 5 times higher than they had been at the previous World Cup in Qatar. 5 times. Not a modest increase to account for inflation or rising costs. 5 times the price for the same kind of seat at the same kind of match. And it didn't stop there. The accusations escalated from advocacy groups to government institutions. The attorneys general of multiple U.S. states, New York, New Jersey, and Texas among them, launched their own investigations into FIFA's ticketing practices. The accusations were serious. Fans claiming they were misled about where their seats actually were located. Fans paying premium prices, expecting premium views, and ending up in sections nowhere near what they were promised when they clicked buy. This wasn't just a pricing dispute anymore. It was becoming a question of trust. Whether FIFA had been straight with the very people funding this tournament through their wallets, one ticket purchase at a time. But here is where it gets even more revealing. In the face of mounting criticism, FIFA made a concession. They announced a small allocation of tickets priced at just $60, positioned almost as proof, almost as a peace offering, that the World Cup was still accessible to everyday fans regardless of the headlines about soaring prices elsewhere. $60. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Infantino himself pointed to that number directly, calling it the lowest entry price of any major American sporting event during a playoff phase, comparing World Cup tickets favorably to the price of watching the NBA Finals. But fan groups pushed back hard on this too. They claimed those $60 tickets barely existed in any meaningful quantity, that the small batch that was released vanished before most ordinary fans even had a chance to try, snapped up in moments, more symbolic gesture than genuine access point. A number to point to in a press conference, fan groups argued, rather than a number that meaningfully changed who could actually attend. So picture the situation as it stood just before the tournament kicked off. On one hand, a public message of unprecedented demand, record-breaking interest, a World Cup loved by the entire planet, with 500 million ticket requests as the headline statistic. On the other hand, formal complaints from supporter groups representing millions of fans, multiple government investigations into pricing practices launched by attorneys general across 3 states, and accusations that the cheapest tickets, the ones held up as evidence of fairness, were more symbolic than real. And then Guadalajara happened. And suddenly all of those warnings stopped sounding like complaints from a frustrated minority. They started sounding like predictions. Predictions that had just come true on live television for the entire world to see. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of story you've been looking for, the kind that pulls back the curtain on the biggest events in the world, subscribe now, and turn on notifications. Because what we're about to get into next is where this story stops being about one match and starts being about the entire tournament. Let's pull back further, because Guadalajara wasn't an isolated incident. It was a warning shot, and like most warning shots, the real danger isn't in the shot itself, but in what it signals is coming next. Here's why that matters. The Estadio Akron is one of the smaller venues in this entire tournament. 46,000 seats, modest by World Cup standards, where some stadiums in this very tournament hold close to twice that number. And this is in a country and a city where football isn't just popular, it's part of the cultural identity, woven into the rhythms of daily life in a way that few other places on earth can match. If FIFA could not fill a stadium of this size in a market like this for a match in the opening days of the tournament, when global attention was at its absolute peak, when curiosity about this historic expanded World Cup was at its highest, when every broadcaster on the planet had cameras trained on these venues, what happens when the spotlight moves on? What happens in the larger stadiums? The ones holding 60, 70, 80,000 people? In cities where the host nation isn't even playing? Where there's no wave of local patriotism to fill the gaps? What happens in the middle of the group stage, 2 or 3 weeks from now, when the headlines have moved elsewhere? When the world's attention has scattered across dozens of simultaneous matches happening at the same time? Across 3 countries, and the kind of viral moment that put Guadalajara under the microscope simply blends into the noise? If Guadalajara, small, passionate football-obsessed Guadalajara, couldn't sell out on day 2, then every major venue across this tournament now has a question mark hanging over it. And that question mark is enormous, because this is the largest World Cup ever staged, 48 teams. More matches than any tournament in history, over 100 of them, stretched across more than a month. More stadiums, more cities, more time zones, more opportunities for empty seats to become the story instead of the football. Every single one of those matches is now, whether FIFA likes it or not, a potential repeat of what happened in Guadalajara, and yet, FIFA's response to all of this was not one of concern. It was something closer to bureaucratic deflection, the kind of carefully worded statement designed to redirect attention rather than confront a problem head-on. When asked directly about the empty seats, a FIFA spokesperson stated that official attendance figures reflect tickets scanned and people present within the stadium footprint, not, in their words, visual assessments of seating occupancy during the match. Read that again. Not visual assessments of seating occupancy. In other words, don't believe what you're seeing. Believe the spreadsheet. Believe the number on the press release, not the footage that millions of people watched live, with their own eyes, in real time. FIFA went further still, suggesting that ticketed fans may simply have chosen to stand in the concourses, rather than sit in their seats throughout the match. Sit with that for a second. The explanation being offered for thousands of visibly empty seats in a stadium during a World Cup match, with the eyes of the planet watching, was that the fans were there, just not in their seats. Not watching the football from where they paid good money, in some cases significant money, to watch. Standing in hallways instead, apparently, during one of the most anticipated openings of matches in the tournament's early days. Does that sound like the behavior of fans experiencing a once-in-a-lifetime event they fought tooth and nail and paid premium prices to attend? Fans who submitted ticket requests as part of hundreds of millions of applications who beat astronomical odds just to be in that building? Or does it sound like an explanation built after the fact to protect a narrative that was already cracking under the weight of the evidence? This is where the story stops being about ticket prices alone and starts being about something much bigger, the relationship between FIFA and the people the World Cup is supposed to belong to. Because here's the bigger picture. For decades, the World Cup has represented something almost sacred to football fans. A tournament where, regardless of wealth or background, communities come together to watch their nations compete on the world's biggest stage. Where a factory worker in Seoul and a teacher in Prague could, in theory, both find a way to sit in the same stadium and watch their countries play, separated by nothing but a few rows of seats. That has always been part of the World Cup's mythology. Its claim to being the people's tournament, bigger than any single league, any single sponsor, any single business model. But what we're watching unfold here in real time is the commercialization of that idea pushed to a new extreme. Dynamic pricing, borrowed from industries built around extracting maximum value from every single transaction. Premium sections sitting empty while ordinary fans are priced out of the building entirely, a strange, almost surreal outcome, where the most expensive seats in the house can end up the emptiest. Because the people who could once afford a mid-tier seat now can't afford anything at all, and the people the premium pricing was designed for either didn't show up or didn't exist in the numbers FIFA assumed. A $60 ticket held up as proof of accessibility, while supporter groups insist it was little more than a marketing footnote, a number for a press conference, rather than a number that changed who could walk through the gates. 5 times the price of the previous World Cup, according to fan organizations representing millions of supporters across Europe alone. Government investigations launched by attorneys general in 3 separate states, examining not just prices, but whether fans were misled about what they were even buying. And through all of it, one number keeps getting repeated like a mantra: a factor of 10. Demand exceeding expectations by a factor of 10 or more, said before the tournament started in Dubai to a room full of dignitaries. Said again in different words after 500 million ticket requests were announced. And said again, in essence, after the empty seats made headlines, when Infantino, instead of addressing the images directly, returned to comparisons with the NBA Finals and reassurances about pricing being in line with other major sporting events. A factor of 10. Repeated again and again in different contexts for different audiences, as if repetition alone could close the gap between what FIFA is saying and what the cameras are showing. But repetition doesn't fill empty seats. Cameras do not lie. And once an image like this is broadcast to hundreds of millions of people, an image so simple, so visually undeniable, that it requires no translation, no statistics, no context to understand, no statement, no press release, and no statistic can fully undo it. You can explain a number. You cannot explain away a photograph of empty red seats stretching across a stadium during a World Cup match. That is the real story here, not just one match in one city with some empty chairs. It's the growing distance between the World Cup that FIFA describes in its statements: record-breaking, unprecedented, beloved beyond measure, a once-in-a-century celebration of the sport, and the World Cup that ordinary fans are actually experiencing on the ground. A World Cup where prices climb the moment demand appears, sometimes before a fan has even finished deciding. Where the cheapest seats are rumored more than seen, spoken about more often than they're actually sold. Where 6 million tickets sold, and hundreds of millions of requests, can still produce a stadium that looks, on television, like it's barely half full, in one of the most football-mad cities on the entire continent. As this tournament continues, across 16 cities, in 3 countries, over the course of more than a month, with dozens upon dozens of matches still to be played, the question is no longer whether FIFA's claims of record demand are technically accurate on paper, buried somewhere in a footnote about ticket requests and applications. The question is whether those claims can survive contact with a television camera. Because every single match in every single stadium is now a test. A test FIFA didn't choose to take, but one it cannot avoid and one it cannot opt out of by issuing another statement about stadium footprints. Every wide shot of a half-empty section will now be read differently than it would have been a week ago. Every comparison between a packed Azteca stadium, 80,000 fans roaring for the co-host nation, and a quieter venue down the road will be framed fairly or not as evidence in an ongoing argument. Every moment where the broadcast lingers just a little too long on rows of red seats with no one in them will be clipped, shared, and held up as proof of something far bigger than one disappointing crowd. This is the world we live in now. A world where it doesn't matter what an organization says in a press conference, in Dubai or anywhere else, if the footage tells a different story. A world where a factor of 10 can be repeated as many times as FIFA wants, in as many languages and contexts as FIFA wants. But a single wide-angle camera shot, broadcast live to hundreds of millions of people, can undo it in seconds without a single word of commentary needed. So here's the question, not for FIFA, for you. When you watch this tournament unfold over the coming weeks, when the cameras pan across packed stadiums, electric with noise and color, or empty ones, quiet and half-lit under the floodlights, who are you going to believe? The statements? The carefully worded explanations about concourses and footprints and factors of 10? Or your own eyes? Because that's really what this entire story has become. A battle between 2 competing realities. One exists in press releases, in statistics, in carefully worded statements designed by people whose job it is to manage perception. The other exists on your screen, in real time, impossible to edit, impossible to spin, broadcast the moment it happens to anyone watching anywhere in the world. And as this tournament rolls on, match after match, city after city, stadium after stadium, it's that second reality, the one you can see for yourself, with no filter and no spokesperson standing between you and the image, that's going to decide how this World Cup is remembered. Not in a month, not in a year, whenever people look back on the largest World Cup ever staged and ask what it actually looked like, not by what FIFA said happened, but by what the world watched happen with its own eyes on the second day of the tournament, in a stadium in a city that loves football more than almost anywhere else on earth. What do you think? Was Guadalajara a one-off, an unlucky night, an unfortunate camera angle, a coincidence of timing, and an unremarkable fixture that simply didn't draw a crowd? Or was it the first crack in a much bigger story, still waiting to unfold across the next month, stadium by stadium, match by match? Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to be here when the next piece of this story breaks, because there will be a next piece, make sure you're subscribed, because something tells us this is only the beginning. Because some images, once seen, simply cannot be unseen. And an empty seat, broadcast to the entire world during the biggest tournament football has ever staged, says more than any press conference, any statistic, and any fact